please welcome Bob Grohowski, Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Senior Legal Counsel at T. Rowe Price.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you. I am Bob Grohowski with T. Rowe Price. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this next session. But before I do, I just wanted to congratulate Karen and the entire IAA team on the program today and all that they're doing this week. As a proud IAA alum, I can tell you it's a heavy lift for the staff, but as a member, I can tell you, Karen and the team, we really appreciate everything you're doing for us and for the industry. This next session is going to focus on retirement savings, and we're lucky to have three incredible thought leaders in the industry with us today. Lisa Messina, who earlier in her career was one of the founding executive director of Oregon Saves, which was the first program of its type in the nation, is going to moderate the discussion with Ann Lester and my colleague and good friend, Michael Davis. I am not exaggerating to say that the topics they're going to speak about on this panel are just critically important to us. As you saw in the last session with Congressman Himes, you know, the idea of the Secure Act and the idea of retirement savings and the power that it can have to help hopefully all Americans save for their retirements is incredibly important to us as a society. It's incredibly important to us as an industry. And for T. Rowe Price, it's incredibly important to us as a firm. About 2/3 of our assets under management are related to retirement savings in one way or another, and so we are deeply committed to trying finding ways to make the system work and work well in an inclusive way so that everyone can participate regardless of their backgrounds and circumstances. So this discussion is also very timely as we head to the Hill tomorrow, and hopefully in support of the Secure Act. And we were very pleased to hear Congressman Himes note that Chairman Neal thinks it has a good chance of passing in this Congress. So Karen and Neal, thank you for including this topic on the agenda for us today. And Lisa, Ann, and Michael, thank you in advance for what I'm sure will be an outstanding discussion.
Thank you very much. All right, we're going to start with an action step. So y'all have a little yellow evaluation form in front of you. And today is now is your catch-up moment for today if you haven't done it yet. I just want to point something out. So Ann, Michael, and myself are listed on the second page. You have some choices. Excellent, good, fair, poor. We're excellent, so just, you know. If we're not, I know you're going to let us know. So there are a couple of things that we would like to do in our time together this afternoon. And I want to say a little bit about, I'm just going to do a couple of things from an introduction perspective, and then we're going to jump right in. First of all, you have some excellent detailed bios in front of you, so we're not going to spend a lot of time. But I just want to mention, if you'd like to get to know any of us a little bit better, know more about our background, you know, Ann, for example, in addition to being a retirement expert and keynote speaker, is working on a book, which she sold, which is like super exciting, not
March
just working on a book like some of us, right? That's pretty exciting. We talked a little bit about T. Rowe Price, and Ann has some roots with JP Morgan. So all wonderful and excellent things. But anyway, look for us on LinkedIn. We love LinkedIn. We want to connect there, so please do that. And a couple of things that I want to mention is there's going to be audience participation, so prepare yourselves, right? Like, you know, you've been actually the last session was pretty spicy in a couple of places, so prepare yourself. So a couple of things as we dive into this topic of retirement savings. I just want to give a little bit of background and some framing, and this will be from my perspective. So fill in with anything else that you think is important. But in July of 2022, an AARP study showed that 57 million American workers did not have access to a retirement savings account at work. So 57 million, that's a good chunk. And of the approximately 100 million or so that did, another 22 million were not participating. So we all know those are assets that could but are not going into the system, right? So the stats are worse if you're a person of color where access drops by 50% to 4 in 10 if you are Black and 3 in 10 if you are Hispanic. So what's going on here? And what's the opportunity for us folks in the audience today? So get ready. You are also some of the experts here, so we want to hear from you, and other folks in the room do. We're going to be asking these questions of you as well, and there are 5 of them. So we're going to give you a lead in before we get going. So the 5 topics are the role of the plan sponsor, the question of access, the direction of regulation, some of which we've talked about today. 4th, the role of the advisor, and the concept of thriving in a consolidating environment. And then 5th, an outcomes focus. So getting savers to lifetime paycheck replacement, which I think we're all looking for that, right? So I'm going to jump in, and let me start here. So Michael and Ann, we do some things very well in this country. We've got large numbers of employers here in America offering retirement plans to their workforces. Should plan sponsors be looking at participation? So we're under role of the plan sponsor. Should they be looking at participation and changing up what they're doing? Ann, let's start with you.
Well, thanks, and thanks for having me here. It's great to speak with you guys again. After I exited my former role as head of retirement solutions at JP Morgan, running target date funds and some income funds. And for me, the system works so beautifully, as you mentioned, Lisa, when people are in it and use it. And probably most of your clients or your firm's clients are people who have been in the system and have used it well. And what we lose sight of, I think, are all the people that are invisible to us. And again, that 22 million people that have access that are not in the plan, I find shocking, actually, because I know that the best way to succeed in retirement is to start when you're in your 20s, and that is, in fact, what my book is about. So what is the role of plan sponsors, right? I think the Pension Protection Act did so many great things in that sort of first round of reform to make it easier for plan sponsors to auto-enroll, for make it easier for plan sponsors to auto-escalate. But first you got to get them in, and then you got to get them saving, and then you got to get them saving more if this is going to work. And those 3 things, I think, the Pension Protection Act facilitated, but I do think it left a lot up to the individual plan sponsor to drive by themselves and to have the resources, the commitment, the advice from experts that let them take advantage of this. And I do think it's changing now, but I think certainly in the first few years after the Pension Protection Act passed, most employers were worried that there would be blowback, that their employees would be angry, that they couldn't afford to save if they were auto-enrolled. I'll use 30 seconds to tell the story of my son, who's now 25, who worked for a startup firm. It was bought by a larger firm that had a plan, and he said, "Oh, I don't have to do anything now, Mom, right? Because I'm auto-enrolled." And I said, "Why don't you call them up or look on the website and see what they auto-enrolled you at?" Anybody want to take a guess at what that default rate was for a 25-year-old kid?
3%.
1.
Ooh.
1. Which didn't even get, okay, so it didn't even get him safe harbor, right? So like, if you're gonna do it at all, do it the right way. So I found that shocking, and when he called to bump it up to 5%, because he'd gotten a raise, and I'm like, oh, by the way, save half your raise, like, you better be increasing that savings rate. They tried to talk him out of it because they were worried that he wouldn't be able to live on what was left, which was possibly a legitimate worry, but he's still on the cell phone plan. But that's not the right way to go about this, right? And so I guess I don't want to front run the what can advisors do, right? For those of you who are directly or in your firms talking to plan sponsors, there is so much work to be done to help plan sponsors understand how much they can do and aren't yet doing.
Thank you. Michael, what would you add to that?
Well, I guess I would start with just how much of a pleasure it is to be here before you and just to be on this stage with these individuals. So just to give them a little bit more kudos. So Ann Lester and I actually started out together at JP Morgan. She became obviously head of retirement solutions, now retired, but she's my sister in every sense of the word. And I'm just so proud of her and what she's accomplished. She is a legend in this space. And it's great to be here. And Lisa Messina, it was the first to launch one of the state-run plans. I remember when I was at the Labor Department, there was a whole conversation around whether these plans would be preempted by ERISA. And we did a lot of that work, mostly with the state of California, but for a lot of reasons, Oregon was able to go first. And Lisa was at the forefront of that. So it's like being on the Mount Rushmore of retirement security up on this stage, with the notable exception of yours truly.
Yeah.
My arteries are hardening as you speak.
Maybe I'd be the sculptor. But to your question about plan sponsors and participation, I do think, I mean, there are two levels of problem here. One is just the aggregate problem, which you talked about, and all the people that are in the system. If you aggregate the amount that is needed versus what people have, there's a $4 trillion gap. That is a massive gap. Maybe somebody in here can write a check for that amount. I personally cannot. I'm kidding. But the other thing I think is that at the plan sponsor level, there are reasons that they should be very concerned about that gap, right? So if you're thinking about recruiting the best and brightest, if you want to retain your people, if you want to make sure they don't have a lot of financial stress, it's really important to think about participation at your micro level, right? And so we were just looking at some of the stats, and based on some of the research at T. Rowe Price, we found that roughly about half of employees are either moderately or highly concerned about financial stability. Of those that are concerned, about half of them are going to be less present at work, a lot more absences. Those that are there are going to be less engaged and a lot more stress. So just in terms of being able to sort of produce whatever the company does, it's really important to have people who are financially secure, right? So being in the plan is really critical. So auto enrollment is key. We talked about the importance of auto enrollment. We find, again, in our research, there is, in plans that have automatic enrollment, 82% of the people in that plan are actually in the plan. With plans that only have a voluntary enrollment, it's more like 42%. Really big difference. To this point about sort of being enrolled in the plan and defaulted, most people defaulted at 3%. Guess what percentage of people after several years are still at that original percentage? Well, what is it? You already, you guys know already. So just about everybody, 94%, based on our research from our record keeper, stay at that same percentage. And so this point about being able to escalate is really, really critical to getting people where they need to be, which we think needs to be at about 15%.
Awesome. Okay, so to both of you, and Ann, you started this a little bit, but you may have some additional thoughts. And audience, this is coming to you next. Prepare your thoughts. What can advisors do to make things easier, faster, better?
First, you know, especially for any of you who have practices that don't include advising on 401k, it's a great business. I'm just going to say, like, get there if you're not there. But if you're working with individuals who are running small businesses, right, I think there's so much opportunity coming and so much innovation happening, some of which I'm on the boards of companies doing, so I'm talking my own book. But even if that wasn't true for that, right, there's so many ways where I think innovation, you know, multiple employer plans, you know, technology is going to drive down cost. It will be so much easier for you to get in there and talk to these plans, and I'm leading into the next question, so I'll stop saying that, but talk to companies and make sure they understand how powerful the protections that are already there in the Pension Protection Act are, because they're there, and you know, there is nothing stopping companies from auto-escalating all the way up to 15%. When I would ask for shows of hands from financial advisors who were working with companies and ask them to stay standing if they were escalating over 10% now, you know, crowds of people are standing, we're pushing this, we're changing this. Some of them are also not ever stopping, and they're just letting it be unlimited, and employees opt out or get capped out. And I think that's a huge transition from get them in at 3% and leave them alone, because that's not the right answer. So that is, to me, the one thing you could do: get auto enrollment in there, get auto escalation in there.
Thank you. Michael.
I agree completely, and I think just small business in particular, and just your engagement with them. So 2/3 of the new jobs that are created by small businesses. We know about a half of U.S. workers work in small businesses. It is really critical, and your role in engaging with them is really critical to, one, launch a plan. Have a plan, right? And there are a lot of ways to launch a plan that don't have to be so extraordinary. The other thing I would say is that after I left JP Morgan, I went to the Department of Labor. And a lot of people, you say the Department of Labor, nobody wants to, say much else. But I would tell you that they are very actively engaged in wanting to have new plans. And I would encourage everybody, if you've got a cell phone, to dial this number, 1-866-444-3272. That's 1-866-444-3272. That is the number to EBSA, that's Employee Benefit Security Administration. They have oversight for ERISA qualified plans. But what they have, a lot of people don't know, is they have a lot of advisors that are there for you to answer your questions. And a lot of those questions that they get are really to help set up new plans. And so people think it's all about enforcement. Most of what they do is really compliance and helping to advocate for the creation of these plans. So if you've not dialed that number, I'm telling you, you will get a live operator on the phone, or they call them sort of client advisors, that can help you think through whatever questions you have and just encourage the creation of plans, answer questions, direct you to resources that can be helpful. It's a terrific resource that you're already paying for.
Terrific, thank you. Didn't know we were going to get that from here, but I like it. Okay, so folks from the advisor community, this is your chance. What have we not talked about? Ideas you have, things that you are doing in practice that are working from a plan sponsor perspective. Throw it out, let your friends hear it. Thank you.
So we took over a plan, and the number of investment choices was staggering.
Oh, dear.
It was well over 4 dozen, and the first thing we did was pare it down to 12. And because if you talk to people, the comment you heard most often is, I just didn't know what to do when I looked at all of those things. So, that might be a fairly common thing to do, but it helped double the number of people who participated in the plan.
Thank you. As a reformed investment consultant, yes, I deserve 5 lashes for that. I think we have another one.
When you mentioned your daughter using your cell phone plan, a lot of people choose not to invest in retirement savings because they want to keep a nest egg for emergencies. So maybe an articulation of the credit provisions associated with the retirement plan, where you can borrow at extremely low rates because it's basically collateralized, might be a way to assuage that kind of fear of that's preventing more people from investing in retirement plans.
We're also seeing more retirement-linked emergency savings, a lot of experimentation in that space, which I think will be useful. Yes.
Hi, it's nice to see the Mount Rushmore of. So I would love to hear your opinions and thoughts on a provision in most of the bills. I know they're conferencing on the secure and the early, or whatever their acronyms are, on companies being able to match retirement accounts for people who are paying down student debt.
So I'll take a crack at that, because one of the things I've spent a lot of time in the last 2 years since I left JP Morgan doing was actually spending a lot of time in the Gen Z and millennial world, both on social media and interviewing and doing survey work on that for my book. And it's a challenge because it's a problem that doesn't affect all new workers, but it does sort of disproportionately affect the kinds of workers who work for the kinds of companies who have 401k plans, right? So there's a whole other conversation we're going to have about access and the type of employee that has and doesn't have access to plans. But if you're thinking about white-collar employees, they're the ones who typically have plans. Those are typically the kind of employees who have student debt. So with that in mind, it's an extraordinarily powerful way to get some savings going. And for those employees to take advantage of an opportunity to get the match and get the money going when they're in their 20s and 30s, when it really matters, because, again, it's not just paying for your cell phone bill or for health insurance, but also paying down student debt. That's a significant obstacle for a lot of young workers who are now wrestling with this. And if we look at sort of Gen Z and millennial sort of free cash flow, right, compared to prior generations, it is lower, right, because housing is so expensive and because student loan debt is so high. So I do think it's an extremely constructive way to tackle that problem. I think it does open up, as any one of these solutions does, other questions about fairness, other questions about the purpose of a benefit, and other questions about sort of taxes, accounting, and consequences for record keepers that are also non-trivial, but I think on balance, if your objective is to get more people saving earlier and allowing compound interest to work its magic with an additional probably 5 to 10 years for those workers, it would be a huge, huge, huge help.
Yeah, and I would say, I mean, there are some provisions that are being debated, as you know, on the Hill that would sort of codify how those match provisions are actually treated, right? That could be a good thing in terms of getting more young savers into the system. And again, they're going to need it, right? They're going to live a lot longer than many of us. And if this is a way to sort of encourage them to get into the system earlier, it should be encouraged.
Thank you. We're going to keep moving. So let's talk about the question of access. So we know that about a third of the workforce don't have access to a retirement savings account at work where the paycheck is happening. I work in the pretty new state auto IRA space where 12 states have created programs that extend workplace access to, when they're completely rolled out, as many as 19 million workers across the states. So 12 states, about 19 million of the 57 million folks slowly achieving coverage. 2 challenges. The state programs are in some places controversial because they require employers to take action through facilitation. So the M word, mandate. And of course, the other challenge is that 38 states and federally, so with 38 states and federally, we don't have enabling legislation, and in some really magical math, that leaves about 38 million workers out in the cold at the moment. So Michael, we're going to start with you. How should we think about access? Is the idea of universal availability at work a good one, or, as I sometimes hear, government overreach?
Well, as a former member of government, I'm not going to say government overreach, but I will say that, and I'm speaking for myself, not for T. Rowe Price on this. I do think that if you look at other countries, the most obvious way to get greater access is to have a mandate. I mean, you call it what you want to call it, but if everybody's enrolled in a plan, everybody's in the plan. That is not the case in the United States, and politically, it's probably not going to happen. And with respect to the whole idea of sort of auto IRAs and that old conversation that started in the Obama administration when I was there, and there was an effort to launch a federal effort. That effort failed because of the concern around the mandate that was coming on the heels of Obamacare, and Congress did not want to have another mandate discussion. But I do salute what the states have done, because I think they have moved forward in a way to create that access at the state level that we were trying to achieve at the federal level. Those plans were controversial from the start. And they weren't just controversial at the state level, but there were a lot of industry providers that had a lot of concerns around them. And litigation was launched, and so you fought a very good fight. I know California is doing the same thing. I do think that those plans have a role in creating more access. For people who do not have access to a plan in that state, if they can access one of these state-run plans, that is a huge step forward. I think in the same vein, MEPS and PEPS are also stepped forward. Now, they have not taken off with, I think, the pace a lot of people thought they would, but we're watching it. And we did a survey recently, it was one of our consultant surveys, where we found, I think there were, and this is a survey of consultants and advisors, by the way, but we found that of that pool of advisors and consultants, 22% had launched a PEP, 30% were considering doing so. We think over time this is something definitely to watch, but it's another way to create access for people who otherwise wouldn't have it.
Super. Anne, can you share a little bit more about the nuances of coverage and access?
Yeah, I mean, I think Michael already covered most of it. It really depends what we want. And I think we need to ask our government and our representatives and our regulators to, one of the things that I think is most frustrating about pension policy in the US is we don't actually have any. We have tax policy, and it gets jury-rigged to think about retirement. We don't ever put retirement at the center of the questions we're trying to answer. Now, I think Secure 2.0 starts and Secure and Pension Protection Act all were sort of dancing around the edges of that, but we haven't actually taken the question straight on and said, do we think this is good or not? And if we're not willing to have that conversation, and I'm going to say based on what I hear, we're probably not, I think continuing to remind employers that there are so many benefits now to offering plans. I think one of the things that I've certainly heard loud and clear from people like Lisa, people from the folks running the state plans, is that those state plans are actually actively trying to encourage employers to set up real 401k plans, right? Because that's the end goal, because people can save so much more money in them. And I think there's a great business opportunity for advisors. Certainly, I'm working with some startups that are trying to figure out how to drive costs down. You know, if you can get the cost down to a place where a small business can get a good plan for 100, 150 basis points all in, you know, that's an amazing thing to offer. And the advantages to the employer, if they're a single employer, small business owner, are material, and the advantages for the employees are as well. So, you know, I think even without a mandate, I think it's possible to get a lot further towards universal coverage, and, you know, hopefully we won't even need it.
Awesome.
I'm
So that-
optimistic, I know.
That was going to be my next question back to both of you. So you've gotten us started. What would you say, Michael, about the role of advisors? And then this little ball is going to come flying your direction next. So prepare.
Well, I do think, I mean, we've talked a lot about just this idea of encouraging the creation of plans, particularly with small business. There are some provisions up on the Hill that are being debated that would create universal access. I don't know how much of a pathway they have to passing, but anything you can do to encourage a conversation that expands access, I think is a good thing. I think the other thing is, to the extent you want to leverage your political muscle, is to encourage the creation of state-run plans. So again, they have been talked about in a lot of the states that have not yet launched them. And, you know, at some point there'll be a tipping point where there'll have to be a federal conversation about these plans. But anything that creates access where a person does not have access in the entity that they work for is not a bad thing. And I remember I was working in the insurance industry, and the insurance industry in the beginning took a very strident position against state-run plans. And a lot of it was around just the focus they had in that small plan market and what that would do to dislocate them. But at the end of the day, these plans do aggregate assets that would not have been aggregated otherwise, and they create a market that would not have otherwise existed. I think that's true for advisors, I think that's true for record keepers, I think that's true for asset managers, and that's the way it's likely to play out.
So I'll say, if you like to look at 5,500 data, and I do, one of the things we see is that in the states with auto IRA programs, measurements so far have shown that new plan formation leaps. So excellent for the private sector, sort of a rising tide win-win. But out to the audience, let's ask you, let's get some opinions. What would you like to see legislatively around this question of access? And what would you like not to see? I know we've got some opinions. Here we go.
So I guess, to me, you guys are starting a layer too high. Because you're talking about mandates and creating access and creating plans, but what's missing is the education of people at the basic levels of finance, because they have no idea. The average person, when you say compound interest, has no idea what you're talking about. You use some basis points. They have no idea what a basis point is. They should be demanding access, not being mandated to have access. And if they were educated on the power of compound interest and savings and what it could do to their lives, they would want to be in it, and they'd be fighting you to get access to it. There's so little education of any concepts at the high school level, the lower levels. I guess if I wish the government was focusing on something, it'd be on education.
So that's interesting, and I'll say, should we talk about the bike or get on the bike and then talk about the bike? But we might have a different opinion about that. And I see a lot of education, but I would say, similar to not having a national retirement policy, we don't really have any sort of a national approach around financial education. A ton of money gets spent there, but I just had a kid go through high school, and there's a limited amount of time spent on making sure you know what's happening in your wallet.
Yeah, remember we used to, well, my age, we used to have home economics. we talked about things like balancing the checkbook and that kind of thing. That's not even widely taught anymore. So it's just where we are from a financial literacy standpoint is woefully inadequate. And just recognizing where we are, the question is, what do we do now, right? What is the best way to create a system that gets people to better outcomes? Because it's going to take probably another generation to get literacy where it needs to be.
Thank you.
Some way of allowing Social Security money invested in equities, or either privatized or not, I think would be helpful for a lot of people.
Okay. That won't be controversial. Thank you. Thank you for bringing that up.
Talk about spicy.
All right, other thoughts about access? You know, there was a proposal in the, recently to have federal access, and it didn't go through. Retirement somehow oftentimes ends up in the middle of the list of things that people are willing to talk about, even though it feels to me that that sort of tax advantage savings changes family wealth. I'd love to see it come higher on the docket. Yes.
Yes, I agree about the education component. I think that many people are very intimidated by the markets in general. I don't have a solution, but I want to posit something to you. So I'm a partner at an investment firm in New York. We represent high net worth, ultra high net worth clients. We have a profit sharing plan, very generous. All employees are enrolled. We also have a 401k component. All of the partners participate in both profit sharing and 401k. Guess what the percentage is of employees who participate in the 401k at an investment firm, despite our trying to educate them on the, how actually inexpensive and, the growth of capital over time.
Auto enroll or not auto enroll?
Well, it is auto. Well, anyway, they're eligible to, they're already enrolled through the profit sharing plan, so they get to choose their option. That's funded by the firm.
Yeah.
In addition, there's a 401k component, so they can kick in.
But they would have to opt into
They
adding
have
more.
to opt in.
Yeah, it's
Well, it's not
voluntary.
even, it's actually, yes, they have to opt in. We don't fund that because we fund profit share. But I educate them, or attempt to educate them, every year. And if I can't get my employees at an investment firm to participate in a 401k plan, I just wonder what mandatory means. It's like leading a horse to water.
Mandate means making them take a chunk that somebody deducts a whack chunk of their paycheck and it disappears into the 401k. Australia, what is it now, 9.5% goes into their 401k system.
So I was thinking that another alternative would be to actually say to the employee to actually have a matching component, maybe to reduce the profit sharing and then have an incentive for them to participate in 401k.
That is what most employers do.
They have a match.
Yeah, they have a match, and that match pulls people in.
So I'll guess a couple of things. I'll guess your number is below 50% for people who elect
Yes,
to put additional funds into the 401k portion of your plan.
yes.
And that if you automatically enrolled them in that plan at some number, it would jump up to 90, maybe 94, 95, which I think is the national average for those types of plans. But I think, it's this interesting question, which is, where does the mandate happen for whom? And then what's a nudge? But a strong nudge, or just, here's something in your path, you're going to have to step over it, which means you're going to have to say, no, I don't want to do this if you don't want to do it. All right, let me do this because I'm looking at the clock. Thank you very much. We're not going to get to all 5 questions. I'm making an executive decision to take out the direction of regulation. What I'd like to talk about next is outcomes focus. So getting savers to this lifetime income paycheck replacement. And then if we have time, we'll talk about the role of the advisor, because that's definitely one of the reasons that we're here in terms of the consolidating environment. Let's jump to this lifetime paycheck replacement. So coming around to home plate, baseball, favorite sport. For many years, our industry has focused on asset accumulation, right? Logical, that's how we get paid for most of what we're doing, right? So it's the savings side of the equation. I'm now hearing providers talk a lot more about focusing on participant outcomes, lifetime income, drawdown strategies, paycheck replacement side of the hill. So Ann and Michael, why shouldn't every plan be working to optimize a retirement paycheck for their participating workforce?
So there's a Tolstoy quote that I always butcher, but it's something like, all happy families are the same and all unhappy families are uniquely unhappy in their own way. And I think there's a similar thing with retirement savings, which is certainly for people in their 20s and 30s. And I say this as a former target date fund manager who, right before she retired, spent a whole bunch of time working on decumulation products. Once you hit 50, 55, things get kind of different for people, right? You know, the individual story becomes more important, the individual portfolio, spouse and not spouse, you know, inherited wealth, not inherited, like it gets a lot more complicated. And I think the one size fits many or one size fits, frankly, all that I would sign up for a target date fund through people's 40s and maybe even early 50s is no longer true. And so I think as a former provider of those kinds of things, I was reluctant to say there's a right answer. I think there's some not terrible answers. But so one of the questions is, what are you trying to accomplish? Is it an okay answer, a good outcome, an optimal outcome, right? So one of it is what is and you know, for better or for worse, our system right now requires the plan sponsor to step up to the plate, picking up on the baseball analogy, and define for themselves what they want to accomplish in their plan for their employees. I can make the argument that that's where the responsibility should lie because they know their employees best. I can make the argument that that is a terrifying level of responsibility for any plan sponsor to take in our litigious environment that we're living in. And why on earth would you stick your neck out to say something like that when you know full well that it can't possibly be a good answer for everyone? So I think, you know, if I could wave a magic wand, I think there would be some more structure around how we provide guidance or regulation to the system so that it's easier for plan sponsors to make a choice, even with what we've got already. I still think it's too hard because nobody's defining what good enough looks like for a company. And so I think it's just too complicated. Now, I say that wishing it were not so, but Michael will take a run at me.
Well, I was going to say, Michael, why don't you respond to that? And then also, I'd like to tie in, because of where we are, the role of the advisor and how that matters in this space.
Yeah, I just real quick in the interest of time. So I think one thing we're seeing in our record keeping unit is participants are staying in plan longer, and they're motivated by the lower fees in plan than outside of the plan, and this need for income adequacy. I think there's also this imprimatur that people give to their employer that you know better for me, right? We're seeing that. But I do think that just given all the people that are coming into retirement, like my friend Ann here, who retired in her mid-30s, is that...
plus or minus 20 something, yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael.
Is that this is really, in some respects, a golden age for advisors because of the need and the disparate nature of that need. This is a really idiosyncratic set of problems that people have, and they really need help, right? We talked about financial literacy. You think about just the different stocks, bonds, people struggle with that. Try trying to disentangle what's an annuity, immediate versus deferred. They need people and they need systems to help them with that, and this is really, I think, a great opportunity for advisors to really make a difference.
Awesome, okay. Let's open this up to the room. And we have two questions. You're welcome to answer or comment on either or both. So one of them is, what are you seeing, if anything, that you like for this concept of paycheck replacement for your clients? And in addition to that, what haven't we talked about in this space of retirement savings, the gap, access, and solutions that matter a lot to you as an advisor and where you might have some opinions, information that are valuable to this audience? And I hope that's not too broad. A couple things for you to respond to. And I know you guys are working on paycheck replacement, lifetime income. What do you like out there? Maybe the answer is nothing.
That's market feedback for you.
All right, well, maybe the answer is nothing. Anything that we haven't talked about in this space that you would like to highlight for the advisor organizations in the room, just with regard to retirement savings access, use, and outcomes? Got a couple?
I didn't get asked to do this, but Anne, did you say you have a book? And what is the name of the book, and when is it coming out? And how do we get it? Thanks.
We did not talk about this beforehand. I just sold my book to a division of HarperCollins, William Morrow, and it is called Save Like a Boss, although the title might change, and it's aimed at Gen Z and millennials, not using the words compound return, not using any jargon, but very straight talk about the importance of saving, but also trying to weave in some of the behavioral biases that we all have, using a lot of interview stories, using a lot of my personal stories, because I'll be honest, I'm a terrible saver and always have been, and showing people that it is possible to save money, and you just have to hack your brain to do it. So.
All right, final thought? You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.